It's not. Oh, it's recording.
It's recording.
Okay. Welcome.
Hi. Hello. Hi.
Yeah.
Misha's mother-in-law passed away, so they're sitting Shiva, so she's sorry that she.
Okay. All right.
Should this like see you in the middle because you're sort of cut off at the
Right.
top?
So you can move it. Move the whole thing.
Okay, there you are. Nope, now it's coming
Hold on
off.
one second.
I
Hold
think
on.
you should
Came
have
out of
put
the
me in
thing.
charge.
Hold on. Get by this. That?
Okay.
That's better?
All right. Okay, good.
That okay?
Well, no. No.
That's good?
That's okay. For some reason you're big now, but okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right.
No, sorry. How do you focus? Make it smaller.
Okay, good. Okay. Welcome back. A bunch of people said they couldn't make it tonight, various family responsibilities and things like that. But let's begin with we talked about kiddushin and the different aspects of kiddushin. And we saw, and this is going to play itself out here as well, we saw that the Yerushalmi had this idea that you would need kesef, shtar, and bia. Okay? And we said that that shows that there are different elements to what constitutes kiddushin. Okay? There's the Isser v'Heter element, there's the public element, and then there's the relationship in between the couple themselves, right? So bia would be the relationship between the couple themselves. The Isser bia could be created either by shtar or by kesef. It's not clear, and probably kesef, the kinyan aspect, which would make her usher to everyone else, and then the shtar element is the public aspect of their relationship, but not connected to the Isser v'Heter. We'll see how that plays itself out here when what the sugya that we're going to be discussing is Pilegesh, but it's really part of something bigger. Namely, the question of, are there alternatives, according to the halacha, are there alternative ways that couples can live together, according to the halacha, which don't involve kiddushin. Okay? This is, I think this is important for two reasons. This question is important for two reasons. One is connected to the article that Tzvi Zohar wrote that I sent you. Obviously, there's a sociological analysis that's connected to his article. Namely, to what extent do we need to look for alternatives today? Right? That's an open question. And the other reason that that's important is that I was on this panel discussion 2 years ago at Limud together with Yafa Epstein, and the other two people were there was one the head of the liberal movement in Great Britain. I forgot his name, Rabbi Rich. Who was his name? I don't remember his first name. And the other fellow was Masorati rabbi, which is parallel to conservative. I forgot his name, Rabbi Levi. I think he teaches here in Israel also. Anyway, it was about kiddushin b'zman hazeh. And the whole idea of kinyan, we know, is very problematic. So maybe there's a way, quote unquote, to construct. There's not halacha l'ma'aseh. I'm just saying why I think this question is important. We have to deal with it. Is there a way to construct something else according to the halacha? We're not talking about alternatives which are not halachic alternatives. But according to the halacha, is there a way to construct a different framework? So just let's put those questions out there. Let's put it aside now, investigate the sugya, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end also to discuss Tzvi Zohar's article and the reactions to the article. Let's begin with the Rambam. Okay, the Rambam in the Koteret, in the heading to Hilchot Ishut, he says as follows. Okay, he counts there are four mitzvot. There are four mitzvot connected to Hilchot Ishut. Lisa, the first mitzvah is mitzvah aseh. Lisa isha b'ktuba v'kiddushin. Mitzvah aseh. I'll say parenthetically at this point that this is very problematic, including ketubah in the definition of the mitzvah aseh, according to the Rambam, is very problematic because the Rambam himself later in Hilchot Ishut is posek that ketubah is midrabanan. So if ketubah is midrabanan, then we don't know how it can fill a definition in the mitzvah d'oraita. Okay, but I'm just saying that parenthetically at this point. So lisa isha b'ktubah v'kiddushin is mitzvah aseh. Shelo tiba'el isha below ketubah v'kiddushin. So the mitzvah lo ta'aseh. And these are the two mitzvot which are relevant for our discussion. Okay? So the Rambam has an isur of be'ilat znut, shelo tiba'el isha below ketubah v'kiddushin. Okay? And there's also mitzvah aseh that presumably, say, analogous to what you have, say, by the Isra Achilat Nevela, right? The Isra Achilat Nevela involves mitzvah lo ta'aseh, right? It also involves a bitul aseh of eina zvucha, right? It's mitzvah aseh lishchot, mi shirotze le'echol, and there's mitzvah lo ta'aseh that if you eat an animal that wasn't shechted, that's nevela. So there, if a person eats nevela, they're over two things. They're over mitzvah lo ta'aseh of achilat nevela, and they're mivatel mitzvah ta'aseh, it's achilat eina zvucha. Okay? So analogous to that, I'm sorry for the analogy, right? But that's the way the halachic mind works, and that's the way it is. But, so you have something analogous here, okay? The Rambam, in the sources that I gave you, in the Sefer Mitzvot, also spells this out. We take a look, it's in the Makorot Nosafim, okay? So mitzvah shinun hey, he shezhiranu shelo lavo al isha below ketubah u'below kiddushin. V'amro yitalel lo tiyeh k'deisha mibnot Yisrael. So where's the mitzvah lo taseh come from? It's an isur k'deisha. Okay, so the Rambam holds that there's an isur k'deisha on the superficial level of reading the Rambam. The isur is panui haba'al pnuya. In other words, if a couple is not married, right, there was no ketubah, there's no kiddushin, so then the person is over mitzvah lo ta'aseh v'lo tiyeh k'deisha b'bnot Yisrael. Okay, that's the Rambam. Okay? The Ramban in his Hasagot on Sefer Mitzvot disagrees. That's the next source here in the Makorot Nosafim. I think I have it in the original Makorot also. Okay, he says like this: Katav Arav mitzvah 355 שנמנענו מלבעול בלא כתובה וקידושין. והוא אמרו יתברך לא תהיה קדשה מבנות ישראל. ושאר דברי הרב. Okay? והנה זה הלאו על כל פנים לאו שבמניינו. Yes, it should be counted. There's a mitzvah לא תעשה ולא תהיה קדשה. But he disagrees what the content of that lo ta'aseh is, right? And he says, first of all, he says, "Aval dibro b'ktubah b'kiddushin eino emet, shaktuba eina min haTorah klal v'kiddushin mitzvah v'kinyan b'isha." So that's a separate mitzvah, but that's not this mitzvah. Aval anachnu hitneinu b'inyan halav hazeh shetiyah miniyah b'biyah surah she'ein kiddushin tofsim bahem. So the Ramban has a different definition of lo tiyeh k'deisha. It's a very narrow definition, which in a sense, it's almost like a litvish isser, right? Because the Torah talks about your daughter being zonah, and he says that's only in a narrow definition of the isurei bia. Because when there's an isur bia or isur binyan alav hazeh shetiyah miniyah b'biyah surah she'ein kiddushin tofsim bahem. Any biyah which is no kiddushin, which is basically arayot, okay, that is the isur znut. Okay? Panui habal hapnuya is not included in this prohibition. There may be other prohibitions we don't know, right? But it's not included. It's not included in this. Okay. Shekvar medar b'divreim she'ein zonah b'chol makom b'torah b'kohen uve'etnan ela b'isrei bi'ah she'ein behen kiddushin. With regards to the isser of a kohen to marry a zonah, it's only a woman who had a bi'ah surah. And with regards to the halacha of etnan zonah, it also has to do with bi'ot asurot, according to the Ramban. Okay. So according to the Rambam, again, we may modify what the Rambam holds, but at this point, the Rambam holds that anytime there's no kiddushin ketubah, quote unquote ketubah, there's the Isser Bia is min HaTorah, and that's the Isser of Bi'ilat Znut, of Lo Tachel B'Tchala Haznotah. According to the Ramban, that Lo Ta'aseh applies to Isurei Bia only, something which is Ein Kiddushin Tovsim, but the Panuya Bala Panuya is not part of this. It's not part of the picture here. Okay. The Rambam. Let's take a look at the Rambam in Hilchot Ishut in Perek Aleph Halacha Daled, and we'll see the Raiva here as well. Okay. So the Rambam says, Kodem Matan Torah. Okay. Everybody with me? This is Perek Aleph Halacha Daled. Kodem Matan Torah, Haya Adam Poge Isha Bashuk. Im Ratza Hu Vehi. They agree. Notein La Schara Uboel Otal Ema Derech V'Holech Lo. V'Zo Yani Kreit Kadesha. Okay, so Kadesha is a woman who is basically mufkeret lakol, and she takes money for her services. Okay? So that, before Matan Torah, that was mutter. Okay? Misha nitna Torah ne'esra hakadesha. Okay, so this became asur. Shene'emar lo tiyeh kadesha mi b'not Yisrael. Okay? Now already, reading this sounds different than what we saw in Sefer HaMitzvot and in the Koteret. Because in the Koteret, as long as there's no kiddushin and ketubah, it's included in the Isser of Kadesha. But here, he's describing something which is worse than that. This is not simply Panui Haba'ala Pnuya, or even B'derech Akrai, right? Even if it's a one-night stand, right? This is, what he's describing here is prostitution, okay? So if two people agree and it's not prostitution, she doesn't give herself over to whoever pays her, right? She's a bararanit, and she decides it's not prostitution. Or even let's talk about a less severe case. We have a stable relationship, but there's no kiddushin. That does not seem to be included what the Rambam is saying here. Okay, I'm just pointing that out. And let's continue. Lefichach kol haboel isha l'shem znut. Again, you should underline those words. Kol haboel isha l'shem znut below kiddushin lokeh min haTorah mipnei sheba'al kadesha. Okay, he could have just said kol haboel isha below kiddushin lokeh min haTorah. And that would have been consistent with what you read from Sefer HaMitzvot and what you would have concluded from the Koteret. Okay, but here it's not stam boel isha below kiddushin, boel isha l'shem znut below kiddushin. Okay, so that means l'shem znut goes back to prostitution, but he could be boel isha shelo l'shem znut and below kiddushin, presumably, right? At least if it's a stable relationship. And then he wouldn't be lokem in Torah, right? So the Rambam is not 100% clear, because again, the way he could think that l'shem znut is below kiddushin, right? You could read it that way also, okay? So the Rambam is not 100% clear what he thinks about a case where there's no kiddushin on one hand, yet it could not be defined. The relationship would not be defined as a relationship of prostitution or a relationship of hefkerut. There is a middle ground, right? That's what Tzvi article is all about, right? Okay, but it's Oleh mitoch HaRambam himself. Okay? So let's put the Rambam aside. That's a question. We'll see. The Gra has an opinion about this, which we'll get to.
And the Ravid.
Let's see the Ravid. I'm up to the Ravid now, okay? And the Ravid says as follows. Kodem Matan Torah, Adam Pogeh B'Shuk, etc. He quotes the Rambam. Amar Avraham, okay? Ein Kadesha ele mizumenet v'ha mufkeret l'kol adam. So it seems that his reading of the Rambam is not what I suggested, because he's arguing. Okay, he might read the Rambam as any case of panui habala pnuya. Okay? I think that's probably his reading of the Rambam. Okay, and he says that's not true. Kedesha is only mufkeret l'chol adam. Aval hamiyachedet atzma leish echad ein ba lo malkot v'lo isur lav. Okay, v'hi hapilegesh haktuva. That's the Pilegesh you find in Tanakh. It's a stable relationship. Miyachedet atzma. You have to underline that also. What does that mean exactly? Right? Is there something, we'll talk about this later, is there something formal or even informally? Right? I'm just going to refer back to Zohar's article. He doesn't ask this question. He assumes that miyachedet is just that they agree and there's no formal legal action that takes place. Miyachedet means they agree to have, that they're not seeing anybody else. Okay? We'll see that that's not so. Okay? We'll see the Rishonim will speak about it differently. Okay? But at this point, miyachedet atzma should be put in quotation marks. Okay?
We'll see this year, or we're doing more than one shiur?
What?
We're doing more than one shiur?
We'll see how far we get. We'll talk about. I hope to talk about this today. Yeah. אבל מייחדת עצמה לאיש אחד, אין בה לא מלכות ולא איסור לאו, והיא הפילגש הכתובה. Okay, that's Pilegesh. Now, there's something else here which you have to pay attention to. He says, ein בה לא איסור לאו, and then it's not it's no malkot and no isur lav. It means that it's not the isur of bilat znut that the Rambam is talking about. But he doesn't say that it's mutter. Okay? It's always the... Okay? So if it's... What would it be? Right? But via Pilegesh haktuva, but that is mutter. Because Pilegesh in Tanakh is mutter. So why not just say that it's mutter? Maybe it's a way that's saying it's mutter. So maybe the Ravid thinks it's mutter. But why wouldn't he say it explicitly? Maybe he has some sort of psychological barrier saying it. I don't know. Or maybe he thinks it's an Issur D'Rabbanan. So in the time of Tanakh, there wasn't an Issur D'Rabbanan, but later maybe there is an Issur D'Rabbanan. And then of course you have to ask if there's an Issur D'Rabbanan, where does it come from? Okay? But I'm just putting this out there at this point also. Okay? That even the Ravid who says there's no Issur Lav, lo malkot v'lo lav, there's a bit of a hesitation in the Ravid. Okay. Balei lashon dorshim pilegesh milah afucha murkevet befi shagal. Okay. Omedet leprakim lemishgal mishamet habayit pamin lemishkav. She's a servant, and part of her services are sexual favors. Okay. V'yesh svarim shekatuv behem. This is very important. Pilagshim kiddushin below ktubah. Okay. And what does that mean? Pilagshim kiddushin below ktubah. Mikomakom, okay, so if that's the case, then Pilakshim there's kiddushin. Okay? That's why I meant Hamiyachedet Atzma is a very important. Mikomakom ein isur lav ela b'mizamenet la'atzma l'chol adam. She'im k'dvarav, okay, the Rambam mifateh mishalem alea mamon v'alo loke alea ela v'adai mishu tzucha lepitui eina kedesha. Okay? So the Ravid holds that the Isur Kedesha is not Panui Habala Pnuya. Okay? And Pilegesh is Muteret in Tanakh. Whether she's Muteret Bizman Hazeh, if there's some sort of Isur D'Rabbanan, maybe there's something underneath the surface here, but he's not telling us about it. Okay? All right. So we have, in terms of what the definition of the Isser of Bi'ilat Znut is, okay, we have three possibilities. Okay? The Rambam is either Panui Habala Pnuya, simply, without any time there's no Kiddushin and Ketubah, or it has to be some sort of Biyat Hefkerut. Okay? The Ramban limits the Isser the most, that the Isser is only if the Biyah is a Biyah of which there's no Kiddushin Tovsim. Okay? And the Ravid said only if she's Mufkeret L'chol Adam. Okay?
Is the Mefates a middle ground in there? Is that what he's saying?
No, so that's a kasha that the Ravid has on the Rambam, because mifateh, the principle is that ein adam lokel mishalem. Right, again, so, but he's mifateh is mishalem. But if there was an isur lav, if it's the way the Rambam says, then it should mean isur lav, which is malkot, and then how do you have tashlumin for that?
So he would say any panui habal punya is mifateh? Is a case of mifateh?
So if you take a look, you take a quick look here in the Rambam in Hilchot. 1 second, I brought it here. There's the Rambam in Hilchot Na'ara B'tula here on the second page. The Rambam gets himself out of it, right? Ani Omer. See?
Yeah.
Says, in the Rambam in Hilchot Na'ara B'tula Perek Bet Halacha Yud Zayin, right? Ani Omer shezeh shene'emar b'Torah al techalel bitcha lahaznota. Shelo yomar ha'av hu v'lo chivat Torah mifate va'ones ela she'itein mamon la'av. Hareini socher biti abetula lezeh lavo aleha b'chol mamon she'ertzeh. Right, she's mine. O aniach zeh lavo aleha b'chinam she'es adam limchol v'litein mamon l'chol mi she'ertzeh. Lekach ne'emar al techalel bitcha lahaznota shezeh shechiva Torah la'ones mifate mamon v'lo malkot. He relates this question explicitly. Right, this is a response. I mean, before the Ravid, but he's basically anticipating the Ravid's question. B'she'ira davar mikre shelo midat avia v'lo hichina atzma lekach shedavar ze eino hove tamid ve'eino matzui aval im hiniach ze bito abtula muchenet l'chol mi sheyavo aleha, that's goreim shetamalei haaretz zima v'nimtza av nosei bitova, etc., etc. So he says, where's the no malkot? When it just happens, right? But if there's preparation, if there's premeditation, then that constitutes bi'lat znut. Whereas hechinatz malakach fits in with the language of the Rambam of kol ha'ibali isha l'shem znut l'lo kiddushin. Right? So here's the l'shem znut, the hechinatz malakach. Right? L'shem yichud kutchibrichu, etc. Right? Hechinatz malakach. Okay? So that the Rambam would say not every case is the case of onus mefata. Onus mefata is lo hechinatz malakach. It was derech mikre. The proof is that he had to be mefata her. Right?
Well, so that's what I'm saying. Is there a case of panuyu pnuya? There's no pitui. So there's no money, or is there no such category? That's what I was asking.
What do you mean? If there's no pitui, if he paid her, so there's no. It's not pitui. He didn't have to seduce her, right?
No.
If there's pitui, it
Consensual,
means
regular,
that she
consensual.
generally exercises restraint, and she has to be convinced, right? So that is not a case of bilat znut. For that there's no malkot. If she comes muchenet lekach, right, she knows she's going to get money, or her father gave her over, and this is what she has to do, so that's bilat znut. Okay? Okay. So that, once again, if we take a look at the Gra in the Shulchan, I brought the Gra here. The Gra interprets the Rambam the more, the more makil way. In other words, the bilat znut is not any case of panui habala pnuya. It has to be l'shem znut. It brings it in the direction of the Ravid. Take a look at the Makorot Nosafim, the last Makor. Okay? It's a long gra. I just quoted the end of it. You see? Mikol makom af ledat harambam is the gra. Be'ena mufkeret lakol. Right? Eino lokeh. It's not part of the Isur Lo Ta'aseh. Be'ena mufkeret lakol, eino lokeh. So panui habala pnuya, if she's eina mufkeret lakol, it's not included in the Isur of bilat znut. The kol shekain b'miyuchedet lo levado. Right? Then the relationship is stable. It's not considered bi'lat znut, and there's no malkot. Como shekatuv b'Torah kohanim sham, yachol al maaseh yechidi, tamid lomar mal haaretz zima. Right? Ritzono lomar, dafka b'mufkeret lakol, v'lo ala miyuchedet leish. Okay, and now he points something very important out. Oh, she'eno below taseh. It's not part of the isur lo taseh of bilat znut, ela be isur aseh l'dat Rambam. But it's nonetheless, right? It would be asur min haTorah according to the Rambam, not mitzad the lo taseh, but mitzad the aseh. Right? There's mitzvah taseh liv'ol ayidei ktubah v'kiddushin. Right? So here he wasn't mekayim that aseh. And she also wasn't the kind of aseh, right? So there's an isur aseh, but it's not part of bilat znut, okay? And that would make him different than the Ravid, right? Because the Ravid says that's Pilegesh haktuva in Tanakh, and that's mutter. The Ravid certainly holds it's mutter min haTorah. Okay? You can't say according to the Ravid that there's an isur aseh here. Then how could that be the Pilegesh haktuva b'Torah? Unless you say when you have Pilegesh in the Torah, they're over an Isser, which is not. That's not the implication of the Ravid, right? So, so if we go with the Gra, it's the more quote unquote makil reading of the Rambam. At least in terms of the lo taseh, if it's a stable relationship and if it's not prostitution, so then that's not considered bilat znut in terms of lo taseh. Okay. Okay. Now, we didn't talk about Pilegesh, except to point to the Ravid a little bit. Okay? But the Rambam, take a look at the Rambam about Pilegesh. The Rambam says in Hilchot Melachim, Perek Dalet, Halacha Dalet. Okay, it's in the. Did I put in the Makorot Nosafim here? Yeah, in the Makorot Nosafim, right? As he's talking about the authority that the king has. So he says, Cain lokeach mikol gvul Yisrael nashim upilagshim. Nashim biktuba v'kiddushin. Okay? Pilagshim below ktuba uvelo kiddushin. Okay? Ella bichud bilvad koneota umuteret lo. So melech is mutar bepilegesh, aval hahedyot asur bepilegesh, ela ba'ma'avriya bilvad achar yiud. That's a different story. Okay. V'yesh lo to the melech, right? Reshut lasot pilagshim shelokech la'armano tabachot v'ochvot v'rakachot. Shene'emar ve'et benochetechem yikach l'rakachot u'letabachot u'le'ofot. So they're servants. They're servants and they're concubines. Okay? But that's only for mutter for a melech. It's not mutter for a hedyot. Okay? The perks of monarchy. Okay? The question is, of course, which Achronim talk about, is we don't really hold from perks of monarchy. The king is subject to the same Torah that everybody else is subject to. So how is it that you can have, according to the Rambam, something which is usher for a hedyot? Now, what issur would, if the hedyot would take a pilegesh, what issur would he be over? So a pilegesh is lo ketubah lo kiddushin. He would at least be mevatel mitzvah taseh, and maybe the lo taseh, depending on whether we hold like the gra or not, right? Okay. If we hold like the gra, then he wouldn't be, the hedyot would not be over the lo taseh, but he still would be mevatel mitzvah taseh. If we don't hold like the gra, and we take the simple reading of Sefer Mitzvot and of the Koteret, then panui habala pnuya would also be usher. Then the person who takes a pilegesh, who's a hedyot, would be over mitzvah lo taseh and get malkot for that. Okay, even though it's a stable relationship, etc., etc. Okay? So how could it be that this is mutter for a king and it's usher for a hedyot? Right? The hedyot screams it's not fair, but according to Allah, but it's not a question not fair. It's because the halacha applies to the king like anyone else. So some people want to say, I don't think this is pshat in the Rambam. This is, I think, the only possibility that Zohar actually. That Tzvi Zohar actually entertained in the article, if I remember correctly, is that it means that the Rambam holds that it's Asa Midrabanan. Some Achronim say that. Because on the Doraita level, you can't distinguish between a Melech and a Hedyot. So it must be that Pilegesh is really mutter for a hedyot also min Torah, but there's an Issa D'Rabbanan. Okay? Again, where does that Issa D'Rabbanan come from? What the content of that Issa D'Rabbanan is? You can speculate. Other Rishonim talk about Yirei Alit Bol. Right? You'll have that. And some Rishonim talk about that as an Issa D'Rabbanan. The Rush talks about... we also have it in the Torah. Here, 1 second. Where is it? Here, 1 second. Yes. Here it is. In the Rush, in Shut HaRush, in Klal Lamed Bet, Siman Yud Gimel. So they asked him about... here it is. Okay, the question is like this. It's the last source? It's the last source. Okay? Od Yilamdeni. B'chol hani damrinu lo yichnos. Ma'alach nisan et an leveito l'sham sho. Right, to have a maid servant in home. And the lo. V'kol shkem ba'eretz hazot shuglim lit yachedim ha'pnuyot asher itam b'bayit. V'davar mechu'arhu lachzik hakol. ופנויה משמשת בבית ראובן ויצא כל שמתייחד עמה, אם יכולים בני משפחתה למחות שלא תעמוד אצלו, כי הוא פגם להם שתהיה פילגשו. That was the question. Can the family force him to release her? So he says, אותם שאמרו חכמים, is the Rush's answer, לא יכנוס אפילו באותו מבוי ראוי שלא תדור. כל שכן שלא תשמשנו בביתו, פנויה משמשת בבית ראובן ויצא כל דלא פסק שמתייחד עמה, that they're having relations. Okay? לא מבאי בני משפחתה שיכולים למחות, אלא ביתין היו כופין אותו להוציאה מביתו. It's not only a question if the family brings the issue. ביתין has to not allow it. כי דבר ידוע שהיא בושה לטבול ונמצא שבועל נידה. Okay? There's no problem here in terms of the biyah itself, if it was kedat v'kedin, or if she went to the mikveh. The problem is she bosha litbol. It's not a relationship that anybody's proud of. So they try to keep it a secret. So she's not going to go to the mikveh. So if that's the situation, so Beit Din has to get involved and say, no, you can't. We can't allow this relationship. Okay, so that would be an Issa D'Rabbanan. Okay, so you could say the Rambam holds an Issa D'Rabbanan, and what would the answer? How would a melech be different than a hedyot? Very simple. It's a cover to be the Pilegesh of a melech, right? The melech does. Everybody knows, supposedly, right? It's public. So she's not going to be Yirei Alit Bol if she's the Pilegesh of the melech, right? But the Pilegesh of a hedyot is Yirei Alit Bol, so on the level of D'Rabbanan. I don't think that there's no remez that the Rambam thinks that. I think... Yes, but Yirei Alit, the chashash of Yirei Alit Bol, and she's not going to be Tovelet, that's an Issa D'Rabbanan, right? That's why... the chashash. Right, so we don't want these type of relations going on because we're afraid she won't go to the mikveh. Okay? Which is an extremely reasonable fear, right? Again, I don't think that's pshat in the Rambam. There's no remez to such a thing in the Rambam. When the Rambam says that a melech is mutter b'pilegesh and a hedyot is asur, sounds like it's me'ikar adin. But then, if it's me'ikar adin, so we have to answer the question. So, how is it that a melech is different than a hedyot? Okay, so here, the way we have to understand the Rambam is the key. Really is understanding the issue of ketubah. How is it the Rambam sticks in ketubah in the definition of the mitzvat aseh if ketubah is midrabanan? Okay, we'll have a separate whole discussion about ketubah midorait midrabanan, what that means. It's going to be a whole separate thing. But what does the ketubah do? Even according to Rabbanan, what's the function of ketubah? Those of you who've learned ketubot, why? Even if you hold ketubah midrabanan, why were chachamim mitakein ketubah? In order for the husband to divorce his wife, since Minat Torah, right, husband divorces his wife without consultation, without her permission, he can just throw her out as long as he writes a get, right? So why did Chachamim mitakein ketubah? Because No, anybody know? Shelo.
Just the raise to.
There's a phrase. Shelo.
Yeah,
You got the idea.
Right,
You got the
I
wrong
remember
right?
the phrase.
Shelo te kala beinav
Kala.
legarsha. Right? He gets angry. Marriages have their ups and their downs, and what keeps people together is the commitment, right? At times, right? So, if he can be megaresh without any consequences, so kalale nav legarsha. So what Chachamim did, they recognized that the Torah law was in need of improvement if you want to have stable relationships. So they created a financial incentive for the husband to stay married. Okay? Namely, if he wants to be megaresh, he has to pay her money. So then he gets angry, but wait, 2,000 zuz and that tosefet that I was mitchayev for $1 billion shekel, right? That makes him think twice. Shelo teila kala beinav legarsha. Okay, so that's the Rabbanan. That's what the Gemara says. Lama chachamim titkinu maneh lebetula matayim le'almana maneh shelo teila kala beinav legarsha. So what does that have to do with bi'ilat znut and the mitzvah taseh? Oh, here we have to understand, what is bilat znut? Bilat znut is when there's a physical relationship, but in this case, primarily the woman then, and probably to some extent even today, the woman is insecure. The woman is feeling insecure. A bilat znut is when there's a relationship which does not have security and a framework around it. That's what bilat znut is. That's what the Rambam holds. Therefore, the ketubah, after you have a takan of the ketubah, is you saying that the relationship has to be stable, and Chachamim define that stability. So even if there's kiddushin, right, but if there's no ketubah, then the woman is nervous. That already constitutes bilat znut, right? And that's why Rabbi Meir kol hapochet mi almana matami Betula matayim ume almana maneh. I think it's in Daf Nun Bet or something. No, it's like in the Mems in Ketubot. Kol hapochet me betula matayim me almana maneh. Har'el ze bilat znut. That's what Rabbi Meir says. Because even though there's kiddushin, but the framework isn't strong enough to give psychological security. So then that's bilat znut. Okay, so the Rambam holds that that's the definition of bilat znut. Then it's not that there's a different Shulchan Aruch for the Melech, but there's a different reality for the Melech. Okay? For the Melech, his Pilegesh, right, is permanent. Nobody, you remember the story with Avshalom, right? No one else is allowed to, even after the Melech dies, to marry the Pilegesh of the Melech. She's stuck with him, l'tov v'l'ra. Okay? But the relationship, because of the mitzvah of Eimat HaMelech, right, that relationship has a stability to it. And that makes it not bilat znut.
I totally don't understand. Do you think the Melech can get rid of his concubines and his harems anytime he wants?
Yeah, but she's always tied to him. She would be an almanah chaya. She still wouldn't be allowed to get married. It's a terrible thing.
Why would that give her bitachon?
She's tied to him. No
Why
one else.
Would that not be left suit? I don't get it.
Is it the element of permanency?
There's an element of permanence there. You're right that the king can say I don't want, but she's still tied to him.
He continues to support him.
There's no ketubah. He's not obligated at all. She's a servant in his house. Right, she's a Pilegesh, so she cooks and she cleans, and she's in the harem also. Right. Because there would be a prohibition of anyone else. Let's define it from the outside, right? Not from the inside, right? No one else can have anything to do with her. Can have a relationship with her. Right? Once she's the Pilegesh of the Melech, that's a business with Adoniyahu, right? And the business with Avshalom, a sign that he was king, or that he pretended to be king, that he had pretensions to be king, is the fact that he slept with Pilegesh HaMelech.
So
right?
how do we know that a Pilegesh, or someone who wasn't the king, is not also permanently tied to that person, to that man?
Presumably not. We'll see. Okay? Hold on, we'll see if a Pilegesh needs a get. Hold on with that. Okay? It's also something that Cesar didn't mention in his article, if I remember correctly. Okay, but let's assume, okay, for argument's sake, that she doesn't need a get, and she's not tied to him, and she might not even need a get from the king. But she's tied to him. She's tied to the king for a different reason, because of the mitzvah of tehei emato alecha. So nobody else can start up with her, right? So there's a mizgeret for the king by virtue of the fact he's a king. There are different mizgarot, right? The same reason, for example, the din of an amat ivriya for an eved ivri. Okay? An eved ivri is mutar. No, I'm sorry. An eved ivri is mutar b'shivcha knanit. Shivcha knanit is an issur znut. Okay? But so how is an eved ivri mutar? Because there's a different mizgeret. The mizgeret. So there's a mizgeret of avdut. So the way, this is so far away from our reality, but the halachic principles can still be derived. The way he's chayav la'avod, this is Gemara in kiddushin. He's chayav la'avod et rabo bayom uvalayla. So bayom he's oved the way he's oved bayom, and balayla he produces vladot. He produces little avadim, because the children of a shivcha kna'anit are avadim kna'anim. Right? So that makes it mutter, even though for a Yisrael who's not an eved ivri. Never to read the same again. He's the other side of the spectrum. He's like the melech in the sense that he has the same shulchan aruch as everybody else. Right? But the difference is that there's a mizgeret that exists for him, namely avdut, which is mafkia, the status of bilat znut from this relationship. So in the case of the king, there's such a thing as pilag shut because of the din of yirat hamelech, etc., etc. So therefore, there's a mizgeret, and it's not bilat znut. But that mizgeret does not exist for a hedyot. And the same way, an eved ivri, the other way around, there's a mizgeret of avdut, which is matir shivcha knanit. In other words, the definition, in a sense, of what is bilat znut is the same, but the mitziyut in different cases is different.
I'm not understanding. I really apologize. What is the definition of bilat znut?
The definition of bilat znut would be a physical relationship which does not have some halachic structure to it, which does not have a framework.
But you just said, and why is kiddushin not called a framework? Why is
Kiddushin is a framework.
No, but you said if there's kiddushin but not.
So it's not. So there, midrabanan, the framework of kiddushin is not sufficient, because he can be megarish any time. So the framework is not sufficient. So midrabanan, that's not. Midoraita, it is. Right?
Pilegesh has a framework.
What?
You're saying Pilegesh.
The Pilegesh is a framework by Melech. If you want to be matir Pilegesh for a hedyot, you would say the same thing.
Explain to me why you're claiming the Rambam thinks it's not a framework for a hedyot.
Because the Melech has a din of yirat hamelech. There's a public aspect to it. She is tied to him. The framework of Pilegesh for a melech is very strong.
So now you're actually a little bit going back to the Rosh, that there's something weak in the hedyot that he'd be embarrassed about.
No, nothing to do with embarrassment.
What's weak about it?
It's not.
I don't get it. I don't understand.
She can never marry anybody else. That's
Okay.
pretty strong. That's all. She can't marry anybody else. She's tied to him forever. That's a strong framework.
So maybe that's because she hitiachadalo.
That's a separate thing. How that framework was created, let's put that aside for now. I'll deal with that soon.
But why
Okay?
can you claim
You see,
that
one second,
the
Bata, you
Rambam is
understand what I'm saying?
with the-
How you create it, we'll talk about that later, in a little while. But right now, let's say there's a framework of Pilag Shut by Melech, which does not exist by Hedyot, according to the Rambam. Right? And the point of Bilat Znut is Bila without a framework. Okay? Yeah.
The logic is just circular in the sense of the people who think Pilegesh is something think it's a framework, so then they think it's mutter.
Right, so...
But the Rambam doesn't think it's a framework, so he doesn't think it's mutter.
No, but he
doesn't
thinks
think
it's a framework. He thinks it's a frame. In other words, the Shulchan Aruch is not different. The point is, how do you get around the problem that it seems like the Rambam has two Shulchan Aruchs, right? Right? So you can't have two Shulchan Aruchs. It's like having two sets of books, right? You go to jail for that. You can't have like the books that you show to the IRS and the books that you keep to know what's going on, right? You can't do that. So how do you get around that problem? You say that you have to redefine what Bilat Znut is. It's not Bila without Kiddushin per se, right? It means be'ilah without a framework. And then you have to look. In different cases, you may find alternative frameworks, right? Now, explaining the Rambam this way opens up the possibility to explain why Pilegesh is mutter for Hedyot, even though the Rambam wouldn't agree to that, right? That by the Rambam would say, by Melech, you have this framework called Pilegesh. By virtue of the fact maybe it's one of the perks of being a king, because of, I'm saying maybe it's because of the din of Yirat HaMelech, right? And that she's tied to him. For whatever reason, there's a distinction, and we could see there should be a distinction in terms of the king having a Pilegesh, but the Hedyot does not have a Pilegesh. Not because he has a different Shulchan Aruch, but he certainly has different possibilities that a Hedyot doesn't have available to him in terms of different types of Mizgarot, analogous to the status of Avdut. An Eved, Ivri, he's Jewish 100%, he has the same Shulchan Aruch, but he, as opposed to anybody else, is mutter to b'shivcha knanit, because for him there's a different Mizgeret, there's a Mizgeret of Avdut.
And you think within the Rambam this definition is objective, or could the situation of a Hedyot change within history and therefore
Maybe that's an interesting question.
Relationship, which, I mean, we don't
Especially
have
when
Melech
there's
anymore.
no Melech.
We have-
Right.
So,
Well, then there's always the question if Melech, you get these same questions that you get when you learn Hilchos Malachim, and there's certain things that are unique to Melech, like a Melech brings a different korban if he's chote and things like that. What about a Nasi Shevet, right? What about, you can talk, what about the president of the state of Israel sitting in jail now, right? There are different. So that's an interesting question. I don't have an answer for that, right? But the way the Rambam describes it here, the difference between a melech and a hedyot, leads me to believe that the Rambam's definition of what bilat znut is, and also the fact that he sticks in ketubah as part of the definition, it has to do with having a mizgeret. Right? And intuitively, this would make sense. If there's some sort of framework that this relationship is happening in, so that you can't call that a bilat znut. There's a framework. Bilat znut is when there's no framework.
Does that imply, though, that you could also create framework?
Oh, okay, right. So that's what I'm saying. You could then say, not according to the Rambam himself, but those who are matir Pilegesh, right? And we'll see in a minute, right? Let's take a look, okay? Those that are matir. So the Rambam, let's keep it straight just in terms of the facts. So the Rambam asks Pilegesh for a hedyot, and he's matir for a melech, okay? The Ramban in the Tshuva, the Shut HaRashba, Miyuchasot l'Ramban. That is the Ramban. 1 second, do I have it here? Where is it?
In the first thing.
It's in the first thing, right? Okay, 1 second. So he says, okay. No.
Start from the bottom of the second page.
Hold on.
The way I can see it.
Yes. Okay. Shut HaRashba Miyuchasot l'Ramban, Siman Reish Pei Dalet, right? So they asked him, his brother-in-law, right, the Rabbeinu Yonah asked him, okay, what's the story with Pilegesh? And he said, V'lo yadati b'ma yistapku ba, the third line, Devadai mutereti, kevan sheyichda la'atzmo. Again, yichda, what exactly does that involve? We're not going to discuss that right now. Shelo ne'esra isha biznut li Yisrael, Elam midrashos Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov nimtzeit ach nosei achotov av nosei bitov. Al zeh ne'amar malar zima aval keshe nichnesa leveito. Right, and there's a permanent relationship, so we know who's married, who's with whom, and whose children belong to whom. That's the public. That's a public policy consideration that the Torah is concerned about. Right, it's not a public policy consideration midrabanan. It's a public policy consideration the way Chazal define it. The Torah, right? Okay? So he holds Pilegesh is muteret because there's a permanence to the relationship. Right? And its proof is Shari David Nasaotav, Los Kur B'Katuv Lo B'Gmara, Hefresh Bein Melech Lehedyot. He says the Rambam's distinction, right? There are no two Shulchan Aruchs. Right? Okay, so the Rambam holds the Pilegesh is Asura Lehedyot, Asura Lehedyot. The Ramban holds the Pilegesh is Muteret Lehedyot. Okay, the Rush also in Klal Lamed Hey Simon Yud. Okay, Reuven giresh et ishto, v'achar kach nityakhda imo be'edim. V'amar sheba'ale b'shat hayichud, aval lo piresh l'shem kiddushin. Okay, so it was quote unquote a bilat znut. V'gam ha'edim einam mi'edim shnityached l'kadesh. Okay, v'achar kach halcha min ha'ir v'kibla kiddushin b'shimon be'ir acheret. V'hi Pilegesh below k'tuba. So she became a Pilegesh to somebody else. Okay? Tshuva. Kevan sheyesh edim shenityachda imo achar shegirsha. Tzricha mimenu get. Right? V'choshesh for bia. For kiddushin. The edei yichud heinen edei bia. V'tolin shel kiddushin ba'aleh. The kaimelan kebeit hilel. The ena damos bilat znut, etc. V'hid megarish dishto v'lanimo bepundaki shetzricha mimenu get. Umoki plutag shalom ra'ush nevala. Ela deika edei yichud. Amri edei yichud heinen edei bia. Okay, so if you know she's nevala, then even Beit Shammai agrees. Okay, but here we don't know, so we pass like betil el shetzricha mimenu get. Kevin libo gaspa mistam l'shem kiddushin ba'alev v'lo asa bilato bilat znut. Hilkach hasheni shenitkatsha lo l'shem Pilegesh kodesh girsha rishon v'shatayim mo l'shem Pilegesh v'vaday ba'aleha v'neseret alav kevan she eshet ish mishum yichud shel rishon u'tzicha get mishnehem v'asur l'shnehem. So first of all, there's another question here which we're not talking about this second. There is such a Pilegesh. He doesn't say that the Pilegesh is asur. Right? This is a case. She became Pilegesh to someone else. Right? And the whole problem was that she was married. We assume that she's married to the first guy. Okay? So therefore, she becomes asura to the second guy. But if she wasn't married to the first guy, there's no issue here with the fact that she's a Pilegesh. And what we saw before, we saw also with the rush that answered that she should force him out of the house is only because Yire'al Litbo. Right? So it was this private relation she was having an affair with. She was his mistress. She wasn't a Pilegesh that everybody knew. So in that situation, Beit Din should force her out of the house. Okay? But there's no doraita problem here, and here, since it's known, there's the Pilegesh is muteret. Okay? So the Rush and the Ramban hold that Pilegesh is muteret. Okay? So now let's try to understand what the nature of the relationship of a Pilegesh is. Okay? For the Rambam, the question is relevant for Melech. For the Ramban and for the Rush and for the Ravid, the question is relevant for a Hedyot also. If the Pilegesh is muteret lehedyot, what is the definition? What is the nature of that relationship? Okay? What's the question? The question is it ishut or not? Is it a form of ishut where the halacha has an alternative track of a quasi-marital relationship? Or is the relationship not marital in any way? It's just the way she washes his dishes and washes the floor, which is a financial relationship, right? So there's this relationship also, but it doesn't belong to Hilchot Ishut at all.
The implications for to be marital are that she be an Eshet Ish.
Oh, stop. So that's exactly what I want to explore. Okay, right now I'm just putting the idea out there. Okay, so let's take a look. Okay, so first of all, let's go back to the beginning, the first Mikarot here. Let's take a look at the Gemara in Sanhedrin and Rashi ala Torah. Okay, first the Gemara in Sanhedrin, right? Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. So the Gemara says as follows: Vayikach David od pilakshim v'nashim b'Yerushalayim. Okay, limiluyei shmonasa. Okay, what? It's on the first page of original sources. Okay, So the Gemara asks, "My nashim u'may pilagshim." What's the difference between them? Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, nashim b'ktubah u'v'kiddushin. That's interesting, right? Ktubah v'kiddushin. So you could say he holds ktubah midoraita, right? Okay. But nashim b'ktubah v'kiddushin, pilagshin below ktubah u'v'lo kiddushin. Okay, so it's clear that when we talk about that she's mityachedet lo or miyuchedet lo, that's not kiddushin, okay, according to this.
But the Ravid has a different girsa.
Hold on, right. But the Ravid has a different girsa, and Rashi al Torah had a different girsa. If you look at Rashi, this is the Pilagshim of Avram Avinu, right? Right. Shelo hayta Pilagshim chaser ktiv. Shelo hayta ela Pilegesh achat v'hi hagar hi ktura. Okay. Nashim. Now Rashi offers us the definition of the difference between Isha and a Pilegesh. Nashim b'ktubah. Pilagshim below ktubah. Kidamrinu b'Sanhedrin v'nashim u'pilagshim de David. Okay, so Rashi had a different girsa, that the distinction, and this fits if we understand ktubah the way I said, it fits very well. Right? That an Eshet Ish is the woman who is respected. Right? She's given her place in the home, and she has the insurance policy of the ktubah. Right? And all the Tanai Ktubah, that first of all, if he divorces her, he has to pay. If he dies, she gets a guaranteed income before the Yorshim get their chelek. He has all these other chiyuvim towards her. Right? So that's an Eshet Ish. Okay? A Pilegesh, there is kiddushin. The whole distinction is whether she has a Ktubah or not. So there is kiddushin, because apparently you can't have relations with a man, can't have relations with a woman if there's no kiddushin. But she doesn't have the same security and the same status as a gvira. You have the Pilegesh, there's kiddushin, but she doesn't have the comforts. She serves. She does other things, right? But there is kiddushin. Okay, so that means, according to the Girsa of Rashi and the Girsa of the Ravid that we saw, he quotes it as a Girsa, that, right, v'yesh sfarim, I'm reading for the Ravid now, shekatuv bahem pilagshim kiddushin below ktubah. Okay, so there was a Girsa like that in the Bavli. Okay?
You can't find that.
What?
Did you check them in?
I didn't check the
I checked a
manuscripts.
few.
You checked? You didn't find it?
Well, I can't get Kitabi on Minchen. I think there's been some, Hebrew took it off their site, but.
Not because of this.
No, because I think the library in Minchen has put it, whatever.
Yeah,
I think
anyway,
it's like
yeah.
a copyright type of thing.
Yeah.
But what I saw was that in Forenza, it has below Ketubah, below Kedushin, like we have in our thing.
Yeah.
And in something that was called Yerushalayim, it's called, hold on, I can't find what it's called. A different version.
Yeah.
What it says is below Ketubah the Kiddushin. So I don't know if the low is chal on the Kiddushin
right.
or not chal on the Kiddushin.
Right.
And that might be the difference.
But it's clear that Rashi had a different girsa, right? As well as the Ravid.
Right. Or the Ravid realizes that they're two girsos.
Okay, the Yesh Sfarim, he says.
By saying the Yesh Sfarim, that implies to me that he understands the Yesh Sfarim to say something else.
Oh, obviously. Yeah,
right.
he's
but
aware of the...
Rashi doesn't seem to have that.
Okay, the Ravid was a little later. I don't know. Okay. In any case, so we have a machloket, right? Whether a Pilegesh requires kiddushin or not. Okay. Again, if a Pilegesh, this I'm relating back to Tzizar's article, he doesn't mention that as a possibility at all when he wants to present Pilegesh as an alternative, and it's in order to have a less permanent type relationship which would satisfy emotional and physical needs without the level of commitment which is necessary for a mature person to enter and when you get married, right? So if you say you need kiddushin, but you just don't have ketubah, it doesn't really work as an alternative. Okay?
For either of our two,
right.
either of our two concerns. That you
Right. He's still getting married, right? And it doesn't work. Okay.
But the other proponents
Yeah.
of it don't seem, besides this Rashi, I didn't